So in the ongoing conversation around immediacy, there is a really potent way to approach this. And we could just call it leading edge, trailing edge. It's been spoken about before, yet it might be worth entertaining again. So this video, we're going to get into the nature of what lives at the leading edge of experience and what also seems to live at the trailing edge. The way we could describe most of our experiences when it comes to thought is that which lives at the trailing edge, that which we are picking up seemingly after the fact in this little buffer of time, this little cause and effect bubble. And sometimes what happens is the mind wants to force a learning experience and move deeper into reflection and attempt to create a strategy on how to fix something in the future, so on and so forth. This is the primary issue with being learning oriented in the way that the mind usually wants us to be. Now, this isn't to speak against learning in general. Instead, it's just to look at the nature of how the mind is strategizing a potential future moment and therefore still glossing over what's happening right here, right now. That's all we need to do is just simply be with what is exactly as it is. That's the nature of all of this. So we can start to explore what leading edge and trailing edge truly looks like. Trailing edge tends to have a thought. That's usually a good indication that we're reaching the trailing edge of an experience. It has some kind of evaluation. You might notice some aspect of self-judgment. Those pieces right there are giving you a sense of trailing edge. That means something has already shown up, and essentially the mind has stepped in and we're catching it seemingly on the backside of that experience, which is actually okay. That's definitely a part of the path and nothing to shy away from. Instead, when we catch something on the trailing edge, it tends to be at the leading edge of something else. Going back to just that simple metaphor of reactions seem to fall like dominoes, just a sequence of reaction formations distorting on the way out or down the line. Or, actually probably more accurately, they seem to distort circularly or cyclically around and around and around. That's the nature of these cycles that we seem to step into. So, to catch the trailing edge of an experience is likely the leading edge of the next aspect of things. So no need to worry too much if you are living at the trailing edge, if you're catching things seemingly after. There is obviously something else that you can entertain right there in that moment. And just by plucking the next domino, as we can say, you aren't allowing that reaction formation to continue, and therefore you are moving outside of the patterning, you are moving outside of that cycle. So that is also highly effective and highly recommended, and there's no need to step into any more self-judgment around the fact that you might be realizing your experiences are more trailing edge right now. That's okay. It's definitely part of this. Now, here's what a leading edge experiment or experience looks like. To be at the leading edge is to realize a sensational aspect of the experience before thought steps in and creates an evaluation or a label, or before we are attached to that. And when we are at the leading edge of an experience, what we tend to realize is the natural attention that rests in the sensation or in the sensational space. And then we notice how thought shows up after. So, as an example, right after meeting Angelo, there was a point sitting on the couch where there was a bunch of floating butterfly feelings in the gut, and it became apparent that that was something was stirring. And after sitting with it for a while, there was suddenly these thoughts that seemed to cascade upward, and they were saying things like, oh, you better go get some wine, or you better text this person, or you better go do something. And it seemed like it was attempting to evaluate the circumstance and say something needs to happen, something needs to be fixed. And in that instant, it was really obvious that the thoughts were late to the party, so to speak. They showed up really after the fact. And it was clear that they had no influence on the experience itself. In fact, this experience was more than just fine. It was interesting, and it was filled to the brim with curiosity. So I rested with that experience. That is what leading edge tends to look like. to be right at the cusp of what seems to be arising or showing up in the moment. That's the nature of leading edge. So if you find yourself in a lot of trailing edge experiences right now, that's okay. The one thing you can do immediately, as soon as you realize that these thoughts are showing up or there's an evaluation taking place, is just put your foot on the brake, so to speak, and watch for the next leading edge. Watch for that next thought. And instead of engaging with that thought, stay close to what you're with now. And to one, better that, as you are realizing the evaluation that's taking place or the labeling or the thought around the experience, now take that thought and turn attention into the senses. So let's say the thought is something like, oh, that was stupid. And, these self-judgment thoughts seem to be fairly common for most of us. You stop into that thought before adding the next thing. Maybe another thought wants to come in and look for some kind of solution or to strategize. And you sit with the feeling that seems to be corresponding with that initial thought. That's to catch things on the trailing edge, and then essentially move attention to what we can call the leading edge of experience. It does seem like sensations and the senses are the leading edge of all of this. In fact, it seems like all thoughts are essentially referencing something in the sense field. Sometimes it does seem like thoughts are referencing other thoughts, but if you catch thoughts early, you will start to recognize that they're always pointing to something that's in the senses and attempting to model it in a way that is absolutely incompatible with the experience itself. And so what we do over time is we continue to bring attention persistently and directly into the senses, especially if it feels like something that's living in the center line from the throat down to behind the navel. Bring full attention to that space and rest with it as thoroughly as possible. And what you will begin to see is all experience is essentially leading edge. It seems to be an uncaused, arising, sensational experience that really doesn't have a quality, doesn't really have a story or a narrative. It just is arising. It's just showing up spontaneously, immediately. And then the thoughts come in and essentially model that, compartmentalize it, add it to a narrative, and then create strategies from there. So we are essentially interrupting that process by looking at trailing edge, leading edge. And as mentioned before, if it is only trailing edge that you're exploring right now, keep turning that attention inward to the sensational space here, the ubiquitousness of these sensations, and be persistent about that, and you will soon start to recognize leading edge, because truly, that is where the leading edge of all experience truly seems to be. And if there are any questions about this, as always, please put them in the comments, and we can get into that discussion. And of course, thank you for being here and lending your eyes and ears. Very much appreciated.